In today's video, we'll be looking at the 4 critical numbers that will help you time your retirement here in Canada. Across the countless chats that we've had here with clients across Canada, the one question we see time and time again is, how do I know if I'm ready to retire just financially, the raw number? Which is why today I'll walk you through those 4 numbers that you should track to help time your retirement without any of the guesswork. If you get them right, you're on track. If you get them wrong, then you might be working longer than you need to. Let's get right into it. So if you're in your 50s and you're looking at your retirement accounts and you're wondering if you're on track for retirement, the good news is you don't need to do some complicated formula to kind of figure this stuff out. And there's also not just a single number that applies to every single person. Every situation is going to be unique. You really, though, just need to track these 4 numbers. So here on the channel, we're all about showing, not telling. So we'll highlight these 4 numbers through a case study of a guy named Larry Sage. Larry is married to Carrie. Larry just turned 58 and he's getting pretty serious about his retirement plans. Larry and Carrie have been able to save up about $1.3 million and they're hoping to retire at the age of 63. Now he's hoping to live on about $7,000 a month after tax once he pulls the plug on his work. He was an engineer. He's almost done paying off of his mortgage. He just has a few more kind of glorious payments left after a recent upsize to accommodate a growing suite of hungry grandkids. And so he's not interested in really making a downsize anytime soon. This might sound familiar for you too. So that's the case that we'll use to highlight how these 4 numbers might apply to your situation. So the first number that you need to track when timing your retirement is your fixed expenses. So these are going to be the essentials, right? The day-to-day living costs that aren't going away anytime soon, even after you retire. I'm talking here about housing, utilities, kind of core grocery expenses, insurances, basically the stuff that you need to kind of keep on paying to keep your life running smoothly. So for Larry, he's estimating that once his mortgage is paid off next year, and he no longer needs to save for retirement because he is in fact retired, he figures his fixed expenses are going to drop to about $7,000 a month. And that's going to cover kind of all of his basics. Now this is a great start because it's going to give Larry and Carrie a clear baseline of how much money they'll need to have coming in each month to maintain their lifestyle in retirement. But here's the thing, when you're figuring out your fixed expenses, it's really important to be realistic. Really, folks will do one of 2 things. Many people will either underestimate what they think that they'll need, or they'll do the opposite. They'll overestimate how much their costs are going to drop. And of course, you're going to save money on maybe commuting or maybe work-related expenses, but other costs like travel, insurance, home maintenance, those can actually go up as you age. So just make sure that you're accounting for everything that you're going to need to live comfortably. I just actually ran this exercise with someone who reached out here from the YouTube community. They figured they needed about $10K per month to fund their lifestyle in retirement, so about $120,000 a year. Before we actually met, though, they actually ran the numbers to double check what the real number was. And they were pretty shocked to see that it was clocking in at $190,000 net, which is to say those vibes that you've got about your spending, right? How you feel about your current spending, those vibes cannot be trusted. And if your gut can't be trusted about your past spending, then you for sure can't trust your gut about your future spending. So to fix this, you just got to do the work. Figure out those fixed costs. It might take you 30 minutes. And if you want to make this super easy, go sign up for an online paid tool like YNAB, You Need a Budget, or Monarch. Both of those are available up here in Canada. They help to track your spending across a multiple kind of like suite of sources. So credit cards, checking accounts, savings accounts, all that. They'll kind of pull it all in, parse it, and probably save about 80% of the work of this task. By the way, if we haven't ever met, I'm Steve Willems. I'm a practicing certified financial planner and wealth advisor with the Willems Wealth Planning Group out here in BC. We started this channel to help you plan for your own retirement, helping you plan and arrange your investments, your income streams, and ideally pay less tax along the way. Now, one thing to remember is we're not talking about luxury expenses here. So things like more opulent travel or those bucket list trips, eating out, maybe new hobbies, those things are all great, but those aren't fixed expenses. Your fixed costs are the must-haves. This is your baseline, right? These are going to be the numbers that you absolutely need to cover kind of no matter what happens. And this is going to give us a baseline off of which to run the rest of the model. Now, some people will make the mistake here also of thinking that their expenses will magically drop in half as soon as they retire. Spoiler alert, unless you plan to, retire in the middle of the forest with zero Wi-Fi, your expenses probably won't actually shrink quite as much as you think. The reality is the drop is usually more modest, maybe 20 to 30% of your pre-retirement income. It's important to base your retirement plan off of these actual numbers, not wishful thinking. You don't want to find yourself in the position where you're just cutting it too close. At the end of the day, this number is going to be the most important number that's going to shape all the rest of your retirement plan. So you got to get it right. Now, we can only go over this first number in just a small amount of detail because I got to move on to the next one. But I'll break this down again in more detail in another video in a few weeks' time. So if you want to make sure that you don't want to miss out, I just hit that subscribe button. The second key number to track when you're planning for your retirement is your fixed income sources or your non-portfolio income sources. Now, these are going to be the reliable, guaranteed income streams that you can count on every single month, regardless of what's going on in life or in the markets. Now, up here in Canada, for most people, this means things like CPP, Canada Pension Plan, OAS, Old Age Security, any defined benefit pension incomes that you're lucky enough to have, maybe annuities or stabilized rental income streams. Back to our case, for Larry, he's done some homework and he knows that starting at age 65, he'll be getting about $1,900 a month from CPP and OAS combined. You should be getting about 80% of CPP, which is actually 24% higher than the national average. Carrie, his wife, will be getting about 50% of CPP, and so she's expecting about $1,450 a month from CPP and OAS combined. And that's great, but here's the catch. Larry wants to retire at 63, and so he's got to bridge those 2 years of income before those benefits kick in. So I'll talk about how to handle that in the next section. But for now, let's focus on what the fixed income amounts will tell you. Now, your fixed income amounts are going to be the foundation of your retirement plan because these income streams, they're not going to fluctuate. They're predictable, and that means they're going to cover a portion of those essential expenses, those fixed costs that we just talked about. So for Larry and Carrie, that $3,350 a month of kind of guaranteed income coming in at 65 is going to cover nearly half of their $7,000 of fixed monthly expenses, which is a pretty good start. But here's the thing. When you're calculating your fixed income, it's important to, again, know here the exact numbers, especially as you enter the retirement risk zone. Before that, you can kind of get away with best guesses. But as you get closer, say 5 or 3 or 1 year out from your actual retirement, you don't want to take a guess anymore. It's time to take the time to actually pull up your CPP estimate. You can pretty easily find these things by logging into your My Service Canada account. Your old age security is going to be the full entitlement so long as you've lived in Canada for at least 40 years after your age 18. For defined benefit pensions, you're going to want to reach out to your plan administrator to get those details. And if you're planning on using an annuity or maybe other income source, you got to get those numbers locked down too. Now, one of the most common mistakes is people starting taking their CPP too early. This is especially important as people are living longer and longer. The relative importance of these inflation-protected income streams is only increasing. Now, you probably know you can start CPP as early as 60, but for each year that you take it before 65, that benefit's going to get reduced, which would work out to about a 36% kind of permanent reduction for the rest of your life if you did end up taking it 5 years earlier. The impacts are pretty massive. We've covered this pretty extensively in past videos. I'll link to one of them up here right now as well. Now, everyone's situation is going to be different here, right? If you're just having a hard time kind of making ends meet and you need to eat, you got to pay the bills, then a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. Or if you've got reduced life expectancy, or perhaps you're no longer contributing to CPP in your late 50s, then starting CPP early might actually make sense for you. But in general, if you can afford to wait, delaying CPP is going to be the smart move for most Canadians. Now, another thing to keep in mind is inflation. While CPP and OAS do account for inflation, not all pensions do. And so it's going to be important to understand how inflation might affect your fixed income sources over time. If your defined benefit pension doesn't have that inflation adjustment, its purchasing power is going to decrease over time, which is going to leave you with a bigger gap to fill later on. That's number 2, fixed income sources. The third key number you need to track is then your income gap. This is going to be the shortfall between your fixed expenses over here and your fixed income sources over here. In other words, if you add up all of your essential costs and your guaranteed income, How much do you need each month to maintain your lifestyle, to fill that gap? That's your income gap. And for most people, this gap needs to be filled by drawing from your savings or your investments. Now for Larry and Carrie, the situation's pretty straightforward. We've kept it simple. So their fixed expenses after the mortgage is paid off is going to be about $7,000 a month after tax. But their fixed income from CPP and OAS is going to be about $3,350 a month. And that's not going to start until age 65 at the earliest. This means that for 2 whole years, from age 63 to 65, they'll need to cover the full $7,000 a month gap entirely from their savings. So this is pretty simple math. Let's break it down though. Larry and Carrie, they need $7,000 a month or $84,000 a year of after-tax income for 2 years before his CPP and OAS kick in. That's going to be $168,000 in total that they'll need to pull from their savings after tax to fund those first 2 years of retirement. Now, here's the important part. We're planning to cover this income gap for them entirely from their RRSPs. Now, why is that? Well, because by drawing from their RSPs, we can leave their TFSAs untouched. Remember, they don't have a pile of non-registered cash just lying around. They've got good-sized RSPs and then $150,000 in each of their TFSAs. So their TFSA will act as a flexible kind of long-term don't touch me bucket, a kind of continuing to grow tax-free. And that's also going to give them some financial breathing room for later years or emergencies if they ever needed to tap on some quick tax-free cash on a whim. Now, once Larry turns 65, his CPP and OAS benefits are going to kick in. His income gap is going to shrink. Remember, his fixed expenses are $7,000 a month. His CPP and OAS are covering $3,350. So starting at 65, that income gap is going to be reduced to just $3,650 or $43,800 after tax. Now, quickly on that tax point, one common mistake is just straight up not accounting for it at all in these back of the napkin kind of math calculations. And I get it. I mean, taxes aren't fun, but neither is running out of money in retirement and then having to explain to your grandkids why their Wi-Fi is still buffering. So I'll show you how this is going to shake out in kind of an after-tax kind of real life case in just one sec, where we'll bake the tax calculations right into the plan. And just before we do move on to that last number, if you want a hand kind of moving past these rules of thumb and kind of the back of the napkin math as it relates to your own situation, we help pre-retirees answer these questions all day. Would be happy to lend a hand. Working through a retirement plan is just way more fun when someone else is running the spreadsheets. So I'll put a link in the description below if you'd like to set up a time for us to meet and build a game plan for you. Now, the fourth and final number that you need to track is then your sustainable withdrawal rate. This is going to be the percentage of your investment portfolio that you're going to be planning to withdraw each year to cover your income gap. This number is going to be crucial because it tells you how long your money will last and whether your retirement plan is actually sustainable. And this is a super, super important number. All of the numbers to this point could check out, but if this number is too big, it's not going to work. So let's go back to Larry and Carrie. They've got $1.3 million saved up. It's mostly in their RSPs, and they got to start drawing from those accounts to fund that income gap. We've already talked about how they'll need about $84,000 for those 2 years, and then $43,800 after age 65. So the question is, what percentage of their portfolio does that represent? And is it sustainable? So let's start with the first 2 years where Larry and Carrie need $84,000 a year. So with a $1.3 million portfolio, that's going to be about 6.4% of their total savings each year. That's a pretty high withdrawal rate. If that was to continue through their entire retirement, if we run 96 different simulations based on historical market returns based on their specific asset mix with data going all the way back to 1928, here's what that looks like. It only actually works out favorably in about 51% of the scenarios. That's not good enough if you're planning for your retirement. Now, thankfully, though, they only needed that income for 2 years, after which the draws are going to be stepping down to that $43,800 number. And that's going to be a 3.37% sustainable withdrawal rate. So if we then go and update the back test to see what type of probability we have based on that withdrawal rate, here's what it looks like. Much, much better. Now, based on this historical data, going back to 1928 with their current asset mix, we see a 100% simulated probability of this working out well for them. Now, that's based on historical data. There is no guarantee that this is going to work, but that's a pretty good probability. That's a little bit less than the typical 4% rule of thumb, which is kind of generally considered a safe withdrawal rate. Now, their figure is in fact lower because we haven't factored in taxes yet, but it's still within a comfortable range. It's going to give Larry and Carrie a lot of confidence that their portfolio can sustain them through the early phases of retirement, even though they're self-funding a little bit higher for those first 2 years. Now, here's how you can think about it with your own situation. If your withdrawal rate is around 4% or less, that's typically going to be considered pretty sustainable. If you're pulling though 5%, 6%, or maybe even higher, especially if that is pre-tax, it could be a sign that your plan is a little bit too tight. You're basically kind of playing Jenga with your retirement savings, and you know how that game ends. You might risk running out of money if the markets drop or if your expenses increase faster than you expect. You could be forced to do downsize of your property and unlock some of that home equity. So all this so far has largely been kind of back of the napkin, but let me plug this into our planning software and we can kind of see how close we get by following this framework. So over here, we've got all of their assets, we've got all their liabilities modeled. And over here, I can see Larry kind of working a few more years and then calling it quits, then self-funding for those 2 years from 63 to 65, then activating CPP and OAS as we had talked about, and then really not doing anything else fancy. Just drawing the required top-up income from the RSPs to get us to that $7,000 a month of kind of net after-tax spending, and never downsizing as we see here. Fundamentally, the plan works. These folks kind of aren't dying with zero. There's still cash in the bank at their age 95. We can actually see them kind of growing their nest egg up by their age 95 in nominal terms. Now, if we adjust that back for inflation, it's essentially going to feel that their money is flat in terms of its purchasing power for about 30 years. They're essentially just kind of living off the interest. It's pretty cool. So there you have it, the 4 key numbers that you've got to track to time your retirement perfectly up here in Canada. By understanding those fixed expenses, those fixed income sources, the income gap, and then the sustainable withdrawal rate, you're going to have a pretty clear path to a confident retirement. If you mess them up though, well, at least you're going to have lots of time to watch financial advice videos like this one. But seriously, don't be that person. If you need a hand kind of running your own numbers, check the resources in the description below. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.